Electrocast. Welcome, Brian, to the Ethical Evolution.
Bindi, I'm happy to be here.
I am excited to have you here too, because I think we're going to have an amazing conversation. Now, for those people who don't know who you are and what you do, can you go ahead and tell us?
I love that you asked who I am before what I do, because that's a really important and critical distinction. So thank you for even the way you asked the question. You know, I'm a husband and father first. It's the only thing binary in my world. And that means if my wife and my kids are not good, I walk away from everything else. I say that out of the gate because the reality of it is I've always felt that way, but my actions were not always congruent. But beyond that, I am also a son, a brother, a friend, a confidant, and I am deeply fascinated in studying the human experience, human connection, human performance, and overall human behavior. And I've been studying that alongside business for a very, very long time, and have been through a whole variety of things, I'm sure of some of which we'll unpack. Mm-hmm. But the reality of it is we're on a mission today to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible by reducing the level of suffering that exists on this planet. Largely of which I believe is internal. And so our waste to wealth method that we've created is 5 pillars guaranteed for any individual or organization to identify and remove or transform the waste they didn't even know existed within themselves or their organization into wealth generating opportunities that are guaranteed to connect and convert. We're all about getting people moving because I believe that move people move people.
Oh, I love that. And I knew we had to connect for that exact reason. So this is going to be amazing. But Brian, let's start off with going back to when you were 7 years of age. Do you want to tell us what happened then?
Yeah, you know, my mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were walking back to the car, this was back in the days before key fobs. So I had to wait for my mom to literally catch up to me because I was the first one in the car to unlock the door. And in that time when she was reaching into her purse, there was a truck that pulled up in front of the store. Driver and middle passenger got out, and the passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So Bindi, he did what any one of us would do. He scooted over to put his foot on the brake. But combination of shock and force, he landed on the gas pedal, and it threw him up on the dashboard. And before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at me with no time to react. Now, we were in an end spot, so the truck went up and over the median, hit the tree in the median, cleared that, hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and then continued on to sever my left arm completely from my body. So it was August 10th, 1992. It was a 115-degree day. And my mom and my brother watched the whole thing. And my mom, the next thing she heard was my brother's voice saying, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there." And as she gazed up the parking lot and looked, there was a string of muscle that was cooking like hamburger on the parking lot for about 10 feet until she saw my arm. So I say all that, and the thing I have to pause is I'm definitely here because of my mother, but there's one other woman that I would not be here without, and I have to always honor this woman. It was a nurse that walked out of the store right when that took place, and she saw the literal life and limb scenario that took place in front of her, and she rushed immediately into action. She came over and put her hands on the main wound and stopped the bleeding at the main wound and saved my life, and then she instructed innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice so she could get my detached limb on ice within minutes. So had she not done one or both of those things, Bindi, I either wouldn't be here with you today or I'd be here with you with a cleaned up stump. And why do I pause and say that? Because I met her for the very first time last August on the 30th anniversary of the accident.
Wow.
And I learned that she had a friend with her that day, a friend that was also a nurse, that also had all the same sets of skills and ability. Now, I want to be really, really clear. I have no malintent, no negative energy, no nothing. Like, this person was well within their right to do this, but they turned around and went on with their day, as opposed to the woman who came in and saved my life. And why is that important? Because I want to really impress upon the point that a singular choice, a singular action in a singular moment can have a ripple effect across decades that's going to impact hundreds of millions, if not billions of lives. One moment, one choice. That's the level of impact we can make. And that's what this woman did for me. And so now I'm a vehicle that's just extending that forward. What I do have to say as well before I shift or we go somewhere else is, look, I realize I have a really, really, really unique story. Okay, I know this because I've been telling it for 31 years. But in all the time I've been doing this, I've learned that every single one of us has a unique story. What's important is that each and every individual learns how to pause and become aware of the lessons they can extract from their stories so they can become intentional in applying them in their lives. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. So it's not about the extremities of our stories. It's about how you personally experienced it that matters.
And I love that you talk about basically the power of your story and everybody's story. It was something that I had the privilege recently of being a judge in the Australian Podcast Awards and listening to all kinds of different stories, you know. So from that, I learnt that the power really is within our story, and it's, you know, it's what brings us together as well. So, and thank you for sharing yours. And gosh, that decision in the moment and the impact it can make for a lifetime in that single moment is just, it's like time just stops, isn't it?
It does, but I mean, I think it's also interesting, right? Because it's this whole premise that we all challenge with all the time, is that the only thing real is what's right in front of us, right? Like, we can't change the past. And frankly, our interpretation of it is based on our experience intellectually and emotionally, of which it's probably not accurate anyway, right? Our future is most of the time fabricated, and though we can manifest and live into it, it's great. But the only thing that exists that's real is what's right in front of us. And so if we can live our lives one step, one moment, one breath at a time, then that's also what it brings down to choices, because it all comes down to the moment and what is true right now. You know, that I think it's a whole different level of understanding, because presence has such potency when people can learn how to do it. And I think that's truly, when you hear of people who are in flow state, people who just go into motion. Even when I asked this woman her thought, right? I said, "Why did you do it?" She said, "I didn't even think." Right? The power of being so present drew her to what she believed was her calling. And she then thanked me, because she said that I was responsible for the success for the next 30 years of her career. And I want to be really clear for anybody listening. I'm not at all. And I'm not saying that to try to draw attention to it. This woman told my story a couple of years later, after she had unprocessed her, or started to process her own trauma. She had to leave town because it was so impactful for her. She went to Atlanta and ended up working in Atlanta Children's Hospital for 30 years following. And she literally had 2 questions in the interview. Was basically like her name. And then the second one was, "Can you give us an experience of, you know, your nursing practice that changed your life?" And she told my story, and they hired her on the spot.
Wow.
And again, what I had to reflect back to her, because she was minimizing her own impact and worth, is it's like, no. Like, that might have opened the door and given you a little bit easier credit, but you don't stay around for 30 years unless you're pouring into that community. Right. And that's what she did for the remainder of her career, is help other kids that she could help.
And it really gets to the heart of the mission of this show, Brian, is really the change starts with us. You know, it's the actions, the decisions we make. And that's exactly what she's done, is she's started the change herself, and look at how that's flowed on. One thing I do want to tap into from your story is what's come out of that right there is how we are not present most of the time. You know, a lot of the time on this show, there's a standing joke that I say that we're nothing but meat suits, and this is my running joke, and so we are not in connection with ourselves. We don't even know how this thing works. We don't even show up for ourselves, and this would probably be an underlying theme of what you're going to talk about as well. But what you do now, do you want to just unpack that for us and tell everyone what you do now to help people connect with themselves?
Yeah, I'm sure we can go into more detail on the pillars, but ultimately I am allowing people to identify and recognize that it's not the strategy and tactics that are keeping them stuck. It's not the strategy and tactics that are keeping them in a place where they can't be present in their lives. It's not about making a certain amount of money or getting to the right 7-step system for success that's going to unlock your life and all of a sudden it's free, right? But it's like, it's so fleeting and chasing, and the narratives of the world frankly damage us more than I think most people even want to talk about or even admit or accept, right? And so much of it is subtle and embedded, but there's also a lot of direct things that exist that we just absorb, right? And so I'm in a position now where I believe, and we teach, that it's never those things. They're critically important, by the way, to leverage and scale your life, your relationships, your business. But the things that keep you stuck are definitively always the trash from your past. And the trash from your past is tied to the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning that existed. And in my case, I'll unpack some specific pieces of it, but think about it. Every single one of us, we're born as our brightest, most authentic burning light that we'll probably ever be. unless we can reach some level of consciousness and self-actualization that it's like we're still shining with that same level of wonder and exploration, right? But then what starts happening? From the time that kids are tiny, it's you shouldn't cry, you shouldn't whine, you should be this, you shouldn't do that, you should be this, you should want that, you shouldn't want this, you should live in this kind of house, have this kind of money, have this kind of job, right? And should, by the way, is a shame-based word. Because it implies that whoever you are or whatever you're doing, it's not good enough, right? So what do we start to subtly embed? It's like, well, okay, shit, I can't go that direction because it's too much. I can't go this direction, it's too little. And we start going down this path until ultimately we're living inside this box that isn't who we are, but instead who the world has told us who to be. Right? And so many of us have this happen for a whole variety of reasons. We'll talk about the human experience and what really causes us to shut down. But like a great example for me, I came out of the hospital. Okay? I was in there for 2 weeks. I came out and I had a teddy bear in between my arm because my bone had to heal at 90 degrees. It had to be 90 degrees out. So inevitably, right, I'm a 7-year-old cute little boy. And the reality of it is everybody is asking me, well, what happened to you? Right? I'm just accepting and owning my truth and saying, well, I was run over by a truck and my arm was torn off. And I got so used to seeing jaws hit the ground. And then once they would roll their tongues back up and get it back in their mouth, 99% of them would pause and they'd turn and they'd look at my parents or whatever adult I was with for validation, which told me what? They didn't believe my story. My truth that I'm living and existing and standing in that exact moment isn't being seen and understood, and it's not connecting with the outside world, which certainly didn't make me feel safe, didn't make me feel protected, right? And then those same individuals beyond that would then start viewing me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, immediately limiting me, right? So I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel protected. And oh, by the way, I've always been that person that from the day I was born, like if somebody's told me something to do or what I can or can't do, like I run and say, fuck that as quickly as I can in the other direction, like energetically, emotionally, spiritually, like I don't know what it is. It's just like, I'm like, no, like I'm not going to be caged, right? But yet I actually caged and trapped myself for 20 to 25 years and didn't realize it. Right. So what did I believe at this time? As soon as I'm accepting that the world's not going to see me, they're not going to understand me, then what goes next? Well, then I'm looking outside and I was a pretty smart 7-year-old boy. Like I observed what was going on. And what did I hear from everybody in the world? Well, if you have a good mindset, if you're mentally tough, like you're going to be just fine. You'll be able to do anything. So what did I do? I lived in my head and I created this intellectual narrative that was this: Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. Now, the narrative the world added to it that I wasn't aware of for a long time was, oh, and if Brian needs help, he'll ask for it. Then I find myself at 20, having lived 13 years, shattering expectations, living in this belief that it's like mindset's all I need, mindset's all I need, mindset's all I need. And oh, by the way, it served me really well. I did a lot of epic shit at very young ages. I mean, I was a tennis pro at 15 years old. I don't say that to brag. I say, like, people looked at me and they're like, how are you don't have a tricep. You throw your arm up in your arm. Like what? Like if they couldn't compute, how do you toss the ball for your serve? I'm like, I never knew any other way to do it. Right. And so it just was one of those things that just so matter of factly I set. And then I go down while I'm snowboarding and I re-break my arm.
Oh,
same spot it almost came off at, or same spot it came off at.
Oh no.
And I was the only one there. Nobody was around. So I had to get it all figured out and not take medications or anything else to numb it while they reset the bone. But what did that lead to? It led to 10 months of the darkest experience of my entire life. Because I was living up the life as a junior in college. I was surrounded by friends. I had like life. I had vibrancy. I had like what I believed was connection. I'm surrounded by people, but I find myself completely alone. And I know that many people feel like that even still today in a crowded room. Right? And so now I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, I thought I have all these friends. I have all these people. And in the beginning, I'm getting resentful. I'm getting angry. I'm getting frustrated. I'm like, why isn't anybody coming to help me? Like, what's going on here? Like, what's wrong with them? Like, I did all these things for them over these last 6 months. Like, what's going on? And then I had to realize that the world just bought into the narrative I'd created. Brian's good. Brian's strong. Brian's capable. Brian can do anything himself. But what I didn't have was the courage to ask for help in one of my most vulnerable periods of time. I was suffering so bad. I was so depressed. I put on 45 pounds in 10 months. My parents didn't even know how bad I was suffering. But what did that teach me? It taught me that I really wasn't connected. And so I started to focus on human connection. vulnerability and authenticity, right? I believe it's the glue that binds human connection. And so we'll get into, I'm sure, a few more things, but what I ultimately learned is those helped me get really good at getting other people to open up, lower their walls and their armor just enough so that I could drive a Mack truck through and avoid my other problems. And then that blew up on me for a long time. So I realized that was a really long answer to the question, but it's because it's so deep for me. Like, why are we struggling? Why can't we be present? Why can't we be in the moment? It's because so many people are so protected that they're completely disconnected.
And to your point of asking for help, in today's age, particularly for men, it's a big challenge for them. Like they see it as a weakness that, I'll be fine. I can do everything myself. I don't need anyone's help. I'm a man. I don't need
I call that
that.
Toxic masculinity.
Yeah. So, but it's the strongest thing they can do, isn't it? Like that shows true strength to be able to ask for help and receive it as well.
I actually say true strength hides behind vulnerability, right? You just hit on it exactly. And it still takes a lot of courage to be able to do that in some cases. And until you repeat the pattern and really start to understand what it can do for you, it's scary, right? And fear overtakes people and all these emotions do. But it's also because there's not really a healthy model to understand how to move through this in many cases. And that's partially what we created with our Ways to Wealth method. I mean, that's what happened for me. I found myself disconnected and I'd commit to human connection, but I didn't have a model for it. So what did I do? 7 years, I chased what the world model told me, which was to chase what? What house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success, right? So I did all that. And by 27, I had everything I ever thought I wanted. House, car, money, growing business. Our business was $10 million at that time. It was like starting to feel like it was printing cash. It was great. But then I started looking around and realizing all the people that were surrounding me that were making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures in some cases. Probably 75% of them were as empty as I was. I had all the what's, but it cost me who I was. So I realized I needed people, I needed connection, but I still was in this place where like I didn't know who I was. And I believed, I know now that my subconscious and unconscious mind was believing that if I built a life of significance, that people might just want to be around me. But I ultimately found myself at 27 with everything and realizing, wait a minute, this isn't who I don't even know who I am anymore.
Yeah.
And so that shifted a whole different paradigm, which is where my getting coached journey began. That's when I started seeking help formally. It was around 27.
And, through all the conversations I've had, Brian, with so many different professionals of different walks of life, there is a theme, exactly what you said there. You got all the what's, but you lost who you were. And really, it's almost like selling your soul to a degree. And one of the things that I've seen as a theme through these kind of situations is that people are trying to tap back into purpose and also their spirit and tapping into spirituality as part of connecting back to who they really are. Is that part of what you also did?
Yeah, it was the only way. And it didn't start out right away when I started getting coaching. What I did in the beginning part of coaching was just raise a lot of awareness. And I raised a lot of awareness that led to a lot of intention that allowed me to get more structured and intentional in what I was doing. But, I fell into the same trap and the same pattern that many people do, right? Which is when they raise their level of awareness, they just become more aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves, right? I identified at that time that I was dealing with shame at a pretty deep level. It was affecting my business. It was affecting my life. And by the way, when I say it was affecting my business, like we were growing, like it's not like my business was struggling because of it, but it was affecting my relationships, the depth at which I went, right? My joy and fulfillment in what I was doing and how I was doing it. My marriage was starting to be impacted. And so I raised a lot of awareness around that, but it wasn't until I was around 32 that things materially changed. And it's going to sound a little crazy, but it happened when my daughter was about 2 and she and I were playing and having so much fun and laughing and loving. And then we lay down on the couch and she wraps her arm around my neck and she kisses me on the cheek and she says, "I love you, Dada." And I'm not somebody that cries, and I want to be really clear, that's not something I'm proud of. It was so conditioned out of me that it's something I'm still learning to reconnect to. So when I cry, it's significant, like something that hits me in the moment. And this was one of those moments. I'm crying, and it was the first time that I could consciously connect to the reality that I had never felt joy in this way before. Unconsciously I had, because I was a mess on our wedding day. I was like a complete disaster. There's not a single good wedding picture because I was like literally a bubbling idiot. Like the whole thing. Like I could not. And I was just overtaken by emotion. That was one of the other moments. I just didn't know it was joy then. I was like, what's going on with me? Like, but with my daughter, it made me pause, right? Because I did have enough awareness at that point that I was like, wait a minute. If I've never felt joy this way, what this also shows me is how pale in comparison every other emotion is I've ever felt. And that was the moment that I started to unpack and realize that when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, I shut off emotional pain, mental pain, and spiritual pain for 20 to 25 years and didn't know it.
Mm.
And so I was on this whole path of creating this concept of human connection and how to really use vulnerability and authenticity to get connected to people. And by the way, they are part of the glue that bonds it. But there was a missing ingredient because human connection without emotion isn't really human connection.
Mm.
And that's when I started to open up. So it's really been about 6 years where I've gotten really, really deep into my body, into my soul, into my consciousness. I've dealt with physical pain for nearly 31 years daily. I've been pain-free for 6 months, like completely pain-free for 6 months physically. It really unlocked a whole lot, but it wasn't all fixed just because I opened up emotions. It opened up a whole bunch of other bags that I didn't realize had been closed along the way as well. So, but that was to answer your question. That was like really what started to lead it for me was I had to reach a point where I realized how shut off and how much I wasn't feeling for me to then start to explore the depths at which I'm just starting to scratch the surface of, I believe, today.
And, getting back to that whole theme of disconnection in today's age, most people wouldn't even be able to describe how they feel. Like they wouldn't know the raft of emotions that they go through in an hour, and when you really start to learn that and tap into that as part of connecting with other people and communicating with other people, you do an inventory on all the emotions you feel in a single day. Like it is incredible the depth that can go into.
It is. And the thing is they compound upon each other. They stack upon each other. And the other thing is that in the depth of emotions, I think that like 90% of what people are feeling and reacting to has nothing to do with what's right in front of them.
Absolutely.
And everything to do with what's connected to their trash from their past.
Yeah.
And so part of that as well is like what's uncomfortable because I do this work with people all the time where it's like they're experiencing something. They feel some abandonment or a business partner hurt them or they can't even step in and share their voice on stage. Right. And then it's like, just to your whole point, most people, if they don't know that they've got trash from their past, which here's a little secret, I've not met a person who does it. But that's just, a whole side part. But here's the truth. Like most people are like, well, how do I know if I have trash? Well, who's the last person who made you feel like garbage? Right. And if you feel anything, I don't care how long ago it was or anything, like there's some trash in there. It's now a matter of whether or not it's going to be addressed. And so then the next question often is it's like, how did that feel in your body? This is one of our steps in our unpack in the pillars and then in our move pillar as well. This becomes really critical because it comes all together. But what this really means is most people are like describing emotions or the most accessible physical feeling, which is like this. Well, I'm stressed or I'm anxious or I'm heavy. I'm feeling heavy today. Or man, I feel tight. Okay. Slow down. I want you to physiologically get in your body. What's happening with your heart? What's happening with your respiration? Where do you have tension? What's showing up? Understand what that looks like. And most people have a really difficult time, depending on how long they've been shut off, even accessing that in the moment. But if they're given the space, it's amazing what most people can lean into in just that moment, right? I did a hot seat coaching on somebody not long ago, and it was like this whole progression of it. And it was this individual trying to step into it. And that was the question. And she told me exactly how it felt. The next question I asked her was, when was the first time in your life you remember experiencing that exact same pattern? And it immediately transported her back to when she was 6. And there was an interaction that led to this belief that was actually the root of what was keeping her stuck. Right? And it's not that all of a sudden you see it and it's gone, but getting to the source or source is the only way that you're going to effectively excavate the trash that's buried so deep. Right. And sometimes we can trick and game our bodies and systems because there's a reason they call recognize that cells have memory. All I did for her was get her into a position where her cells could activate the memory. And then it became conscious and aware so that all of a sudden we can do something with it. Right? Because if you don't understand the intellectual and emotional narratives that were created for you in those moments when your grandfather looked at you incorrectly for loading the dishwasher when you were 8, or your dad picked your sibling to go to a sports event and not you, and you felt like you were just never going to meet up, or you had to take care of all your little siblings for years, and the only time and the first time you got any recognition was when you went into sports, and now you've learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance. Right? Like there's all these subtle nuances to these patterns that get created in us, but people don't sit even for 5 minutes sometimes to feel it and understand it. And now what I know, and it's one of the core concepts we teach, if we don't feel, we don't heal.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
There's scientific proof. Did you know there's 40,000 cells in the heart that are called sensory neurites? They're brain-like cells that carry memory. They've actually studied that if you go through the intellectual process of unpacking the patterns of your past in like therapy, for example, and it's intellectual alone, that you actually don't heal. Until you complete that 18-inch journey from your head to your heart and embody the associated feelings so that those cells can connect the dots, no movement will happen. You'll repeat the same cycle.
It's incredible. And I've recently experienced a lot of exactly what you're saying, Brian. And, you know, like you've been in a situation and we're going to talk about triggers here. And it triggers you back to when you were a child and you go, oh, this is that exact same thing that I had then, and this is why I feel like that now. And the beautiful thing when you recognize that is when you start to heal. And
it is.
And it's like this weight comes off you and you go, and it's like this big aha moment where you go, oh, well, that all makes sense now. And it's getting back to that. We don't understand these meat suits and what happened inside them and how they were programmed before we were conscious of where we are now.
And one of the things that I'm often just trying to get people to realize, and this is something to your whole point of we're trying to get it conscious. I want everybody to hear this loud and clear who's listening. The trash from your past is not your fault. It just becomes your responsibility once you become aware of it or you realize you're burying others in yours. Right? But there's so many situations in life where people feel slighted, judged, criticized, removed because they believe that they are communicating their intent 100% congruently through their words and their actions to what their heart and soul really desires. But that's rarely the truth. Most of the time, if you're not being seen and understood, to your whole point, it begins and ends with you. It's this realization and understanding that, like, if you're not being understood, then pay attention to what your actions are actually saying, what your words are actually saying, because your actions are how you demonstrate who you are to the world. Right? One of the greatest lessons, like, we've been teaching our kids since they were born is the world will never judge you based on your intent. Ever. They're never going to judge your intent. They will always judge your actions. And so if you aren't getting answers that you desire, ask better questions. If you're not getting connected in the way that you desire, or your intent's not being understood, create better actions, right? And start to understand that sometimes it really can be that simple, but too many people are too guarded to even recognize it. Their armor's like Fort Knox thick. And so getting through that is really the first step.
So, Brian, tell us, like, what kind of results are you seeing in people who you've helped take out the trash?
Yeah, I mean, I could give you a bunch of examples, but one of my favorite is an individual that I started working with around the beginning of COVID. Okay. So it was September of 2020. Trying to think the timeline. Yeah, it was September of 2020. So it was 6 months after COVID. He's in the commercial real estate business. He's in development, investment, and property management. Okay. He was on the tail end of a $600,000 settlement where he legitimately, I think, got screwed. He personally was owed over $250,000 by his own company because he forgoed his own wages to ensure his teams could get paid. He was somebody who literally rode his bicycle from coast to coast in the United States more than once in his life, and now was 50 pounds overweight, drinking almost every single day, almost no movement. They'd been stuck in the same house. I say stuck because they bought this home believing it was going to be a 3 to 5 year home, and they were there for like 10 to 12 years. And now all of a sudden their little toddler boys are big grown teenagers and they're sitting on top of each other, and his wife and him are now going at it because they don't have the space they need to just be a family. And so we started working with him. And at the very part of when he worked with us, he said to his team, we have 17 months of liquidity left. He was literally communicating to them that he did not see a path forward because of what was happening in commercial real estate at the time. What was happening with, the big resignation, as they call it, right? When gig economy started to really boom and people weren't going back. They're all working from home now, right? He's like, this is a dying economy. Nothing's going to work. So he literally is like 17 months left. Guys start looking for other jobs. And then I was like, okay, cool. We're going to fix this. So we started working really deep inside. And what did we unpack? We unpacked that he had a really, really deep buried level of shame that was connected to the relationship with his dad and his brother that was typically triggered by any profile of male that represented either one of them. And it manifested as scarcity and such protection that he actually missed out on certain deals that he would have otherwise gotten based on everything on paper, but they couldn't understand the energy that was coming through this guy, right? Like that was really the source of it. And so we started to unpack this and we realized where some of the waste was in his business and some of the processes, his inability to delegate because shame was something that made him believe he was the one who always had to do it, right? Because that's how he validated his worth, his justification. He had big time trust issues, right? That were all connected to the same pattern that we had to really walk him through to understand. Okay, so here's the crazy part. 15 months later, remember, he told his team 17 months. 15 months later, this is what had happened. Up until that point, when I started working with him, his company was 6.5 years old, and it took him 6.5 years to get to 1.8 million. In the next 15 months, they produced 2.5 million on top of that. They extended new lines of benefits, gave raises to their entire team. He upgraded their home to a place where like they're in their dream ranch style home finally. He's riding his bike 100 to 125 miles a week again. He stopped drinking. He's lost the weight. And oh, by the way, he'd been fully reimbursed for everything. He netted over 600 grand himself that year. And they closed on 3 8-figure fundraises in 45 days when they'd never done one in a singular period.
That's incredible.
And his wife called me a year later and thanked me.
Wow.
And said, I don't know what you did to my husband, but we wouldn't have the home. We wouldn't have the house. We wouldn't have the business. We wouldn't have the life. We wouldn't have that man if it wasn't for the path to show him how to transform his waste into wealth. And that's what we did with him.
That's amazing. And, when we talk about waste, it's not just, in a business or the actual physical waste. We're talking all facets of life, right? And when you were talking then, I was thinking, the biggest travesty in life is when we waste time.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
it's the only thing we can't create. It's the only thing we can't create more of.
Exactly.
And to that point, like that's really our biggest goal, because here's the truth, my friend, like the trash from your past, like these low frequency energy emotions, shame, fear, guilt, scarcity, right? Like abandon, like all of them, everything that we've all experienced in some capacity, they're never going to go away. They're adversaries in constant pursuit until the day you die. But here's the reality. You can get to a certain level of healing where 95 to 98% of the stuff that used to trigger you doesn't. And in the, 5 to 2% of the time that you do get triggered, it's a whole different process, because here's the reality. I was existing in this low frequency energy and emotion for months and years, right? And then I started to be able to reduce that. But I'm at a point now where legitimately, my friend, it's minutes and moments. And so the time is what I'm giving myself. That's why I've created so much time freedom, because man, the weight of carrying all that armor is crushing. And just because you can carry it doesn't mean it's not fucking heavy, right? And so the reality of it is so many people minimize that the greatest source of resistance and energy drain that's in their life has to do with unhealed things that's created a misalignment in intellectual and emotional narratives or intent and action in the way they show up in the world. And it's not that hard. It's just, it doesn't feel good for a period of time. But again, this is why our original concept of embracing pain to avoid suffering was created. I will tell you that the level of shame I carried, the level of anger I carried for so many years, I was suffering and I didn't even know it. And what I've opened up in terms of my capacity, my abundance, my ability to tap into energy, my ability to move energy, my ability to help people, my ability to attract, has all come through doing this work. And I want to be really clear. Again, I talked about my story, but I want people to understand, like, there's a lot deeper of a level to what helped all of this come together. And it was when my wife challenged me to leave our other business and what happened over that next period of time. Because here's the truth. I left to go get to the core of helping people get to discover who they are and stand in that and be proud and live the lives that they want. And less than a year after we executed the buy, sell, and left that business, we sat on the back patio And she unpacked that there was things I'd done early in our relationship, patterns that I still had existing that actually contributed to path to causing her to lose who she was. That was a dagger to the heart after all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, what? Like, I finally feel like I'm living congruently. Like, I'm doing everything for my family. I left so that I can build a life and show what's possible. I'm like, well, how did I miss this? But I had anger buried so deep it could barely be excavated. I didn't even know it was there. And so I went from being in the best place in my marriage I was ever in to now not knowing if I'm going to be married for another 30 days.
Wow.
Like, legitimately, that's how much it was. And I told you, I'm a husband and father first. My wife and my kids are everything to me. Right? And so I had no other choice than to go deeper than I'd gone at that point and unpack it. Because here's really the key to it all. And I'll talk about the human experience in just a second, which will tie it together. I like to say now that my wife and I have been together for 17 years. We hid from each other for 14. And she's only felt emotionally safe with me for 18 months.
Wow.
I'm in a place today where I really genuinely believe that the topic and concept of emotional safety is one of the greatest underpinnings to helping unlock our society. Right? I mean, to give you an example, I mean, she would literally come to me like happy, excited, wanting to figure out, and she'd say, hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend? And my shame filter would cause me to hear it this way. Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently, so what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend? And then what would I feel inside, right? All of a sudden my shame is tapped because I just told you that was my most important role, and she's implying that I'm not good enough at it. So then I'm getting defensive, and I feel the need to protect myself and defend this, right? So then I feel this flush of emotion, get my chest all puffed, and I rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last 4 days to show her I'm a good husband and father. That wasn't even what she asked. And now I just created a whole another level of damage that's going to take more time, more energy, and more capacity to create the repair and diffuse the energy that I just put there, which had nothing to do with what was in front of me and everything to do with my shit from the past. Right? Like, I had to get to a place where I could really stand and own that. And this is one of the things we help people do, is recapture the moment so we don't lose the time that's right in front of us, because that's all we have. Right? It's about helping people understand what are they actually reacting to. Most people have no clue.
And you know, I've been doing a lot of research on connection as well over the years as part of the show, and I'm actually writing a book in the background on it, and looking to start another show, spoiler alert, on that very same topic. And one of the things, Brian, is the number one thing out of all of it is we just need to listen. You know, we need to listen with both our ears and shut our mouth, you know? We need to listen.
Yeah, but I agree, but I'm gonna challenge you because it's more complicated than that.
Oh, I totally agree.
Because we can be listening with ears that we think are listening, and they're not actually hearing what they need to because they've got filters in them.
Yes. Yep. I agree.
Right? So again, I believed I was listening to my wife for all those years. We made lots of progress. We'd already been in marriage counseling because we have 2 special needs kids, and we were wanting to make sure we had longevity. We unpacked my shame together, but I still was not hearing that anger was the biggest underpinning to the problem. Right? So why do I say that? Well, I was still guarded and protected, and this is why it's relevant to understand, because I agree with you. It is ultimately about that. But how do we open ourselves so we can hear?
Yeah.
Not physically hear, but have to hear the truth of what's being said and to be able to listen and absorb that versus what our filters and our trash are telling us.
Absolutely. And we've got to hear ourselves too, like what's underlying all of that.
We do. But I think we all want and seek and desire 4 things. We all want to feel safe.
Yep.
We all want to feel protected. We all want to feel seen and understood. And we all want to feel connected. These last 2 are the ones we want the most. But they don't happen unless the first 2 do.
Yep.
Right? So what happens when we walk into an environment? Maybe it's a networking environment. We know that everybody's going to be giving us their fucking business card and they want something from us and blah, blah, blah. I got to tell the what I do story 50 gazillion times and stay surface level as shit. Like anything that lacks depth in my life, by the way, I have no interest in anymore. Like anything that lacks depth, I don't
Same.
have interest in anyway. Right? But it's like, it's either that or it's like, oh, man, we're going home for the holidays and I've got 25 years of understanding how my entire collective family is going to make me feel. And so I'm already going in anticipating what's going to happen. Right? So what do? When we don't feel safe and protected, seen, understood, and connected, we protect ourselves and our armor goes up, right?
Yep.
Are you familiar with, like, again, I realize that it's we're the only ones who use gallons liters is the more appropriate term. So I'm going to say this from the United States perspective. But
Yep.
in my terms, it's a 35-gallon black trash bag that fills one of those outside bins.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is that in liters? Is that like,
It'd be,
do you have any idea?
Probably close to 50 litres, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say it's probably like a 50 liter sack. And so just imagine unfolding that, hold on to both corners and hold it out in front of you. Right. This is your armor that's created by your trash.
Yep.
Now, Bindi, I want to ask you, who's somebody in your life that you care deeply about making sure that they see you, understand you, connect with you?
Probably my mum.
Your mom. Okay, now, I'm not suggesting that you still carry this with her, but let's use this for the example for the moment. If you have this black trash bag that is now your armor to protect yourself, how is your mom ever going to see you, understand you, connect with you, know your heart, your soul, your desires, your boundaries, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your value, your skill sets, your abilities, your growth, your opportunity, how's she going to see that delivered through an opaque force field? And oh, by the way, that's assuming that she's not already carrying her own. That's going to further dilute the message.
Absolutely.
It's not about ears and listening. It's about armor. Because the second you protect yourself, you guarantee you will disconnect yourself from the two things you want most.
Yep.
This is why we teach the concept of protector and connector. What does that mean? Right? There's two ways to lower our armor effectively. One, we can fabricate it in a moment by convincing ourselves we're safe. Okay? To give ourselves permission to step into and be like, oh, I don't need to guard myself right now. I'm good. I'm good. Right? The other way is to actually do the deep work, which is our third pillar, which is unpack. Like, you got to do the work, right? Because until you get to the source, by the way, not only will you not effectively remove or transform that trash, but you will not find the treasure that was buried from all the trash pressure. You just won't, right? And so if we can understand and accept that, those are the only two ways. Most people don't have the time to reclaim their lives on the long way only.
Yeah.
So we kind of got to do both, right? So once we can lower our armor, what does that mean? Now I can walk into an environment and I can be the protector and connector, which means I can lower my armor and wrap my armor and layer of protection around the entire environment I'm in so that I can facilitate and ensure that everyone in it is safe, protected, seen, understood, and connected. But what does this require from me, right? Armor protects pain, but boundaries are a communicated contract that are based on your clear existence. If you don't have clarity on who you are, it's really hard to set effective boundaries. Yep. Right? But it's important to understand what this looks like, because if I know who I am, I know what I'm worth, I know what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do, where my boundaries lie, the value that I add, the impact I can have, where I'm going, and the value that I bring in every interaction, what does that mean? I can stand with a strong spine, unwavering, and a soft front. So this is the strong spine, soft front element of it. What does that mean? I'm unwavering with my spine, but here's the reality. If my wife and kids want to come to me to be consoled, to be held, to be loved, to be protected, they don't want to lay their head down on a metal chest piece of armor. And so I have to consistently pay attention to the fact that it's up to me to ensure that I remain open up front, that my heart is accessible, that my energy is accessible, that it's authentic and congruent with who I am and my intent. And if it's not, then I have to have the awareness to recognize and read the room to see who else is carrying armor. And oh, by the way, if they don't feel safe, how can I facilitate that to ensure that everybody gets what they want? Right? And if we can do this effectively, then it really does open us up, and everybody has the chance to have all four things that we seek and desire.
I've got a curious question for you, Brian. What part does forgiveness play in healing for you?
You know, I love that question. And I've not been asked that question in that particular way before. So I appreciate it. I think it's critical, but I don't think that most people really understand what forgiveness is. And why do I say that? Because I believe that most people are quick to forgive others, but rare to forgive themselves. And if you're forgiving others in an energy that you can't even create for yourself, then are you really forgiving them? Or are you choosing to just be okay with whatever harm or damage they did, even if it continues to repeat time and time and time and time and time and time again? Right? And so we have to really be able to understand what this means. Now, I've had to do this for myself, and I've had to do this for others. I'll tell you that a big moment of forgiveness for myself and me giving myself the permission to truly forgive came in an unintentional way that I wasn't expecting. Now, I won't give all the backstory because it calls out somebody else that I'm not prepared to tell this story for. It's theirs more than mine. But what I can tell you is the end result of it was my kids don't even remember having an angry dad. Like, we've effectively reversed the generational patterns in our house to the fact that they literally don't even remember that their dad used to scream at them and they would be scared when I was doing so. I was still holding on to that, right? And inherently, by memory and trust and existence, they did forgive me. And ultimately, we talked about it. But it was one of those things where I didn't even realize that I was holding on to that energy still. I hadn't completely forgiven myself. Because how could I not see for 14 years the damage I was creating in my wife's life? How could I? And again, I want to be really clear. I'm a great husband and father, and I've always provided. And I've never hit him. It's just energy and words. And that was what it was. And reactions that weren't making any sense, right? I'm going to say it wasn't my fault. And I can sit here and say that, but I still hadn't fully forgiven myself. But part of forgiveness is also the extension of even this kind of recent trend around gratitude that we're hearing, right? And I'm like kind of on a mission as well to just like eradicate the traditional mindset coaching that exists in this world, because I think it's hurting more people than it's helping. Right? Because what does it do? It's doing exactly what I did for 20, 25 years. They're creating intellectual armor and living in their head, right? They're not living a full, connected, deep life. I know this because I work with so many of the world's highest performers. I see it time and time and time and time again, right? But it's one of those things that it's like they're saying, well, if you can just be grateful, like everything's good. Like you can just be great. Get a gratitude journal, write it all out. And this is like the narratives that are being pushed out there. But again, it's lacking the depth that's really what's going to get people moving. Because if you don't embody the associated feelings of gratitude, if you don't embody the associated feelings of forgiveness, then it's an intellectual process alone, which is still perpetuating the armor and protection. It's not getting you closer to connection. And this is what most people aren't seeing or teaching. And it's, it's not, I want to be really clear. I'm not trying to bash on other folks, but I just like, we need to update our operating systems. Like we're not the same archaic beings that we used to be, right? 100 years ago, you cut your leg, you could die. But today, like most people in first world countries don't really have a lot of threat. It's all up here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've evolved, and how we treat ourselves also has to evolve at every single level, because otherwise we're just going to keep repeating history.
It's the truth, which is why the pattern recognition is so important, right? I know we're not going to have the time to go through the pillars today, so that's completely fine, but I do want to help people understand, why is pattern recognition important?
Go on.
Why did I get people into their body to feel the physiology? Because even if you can't get yourself to transport back to the past, you can take control in the current moment, right? So here's the reality. Shame moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways. By the way, shame is also the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing, because it presents itself as about 50 other emotions that are confusing and we label otherwise when it's really shame, right? And so we have to accept that first. But shame moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways. Anger moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways. The pillar of move is literally this. How does it move through your body? How does it move through your world so that you can move through it? Right? So what does that mean? Well, okay, if it moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways, then now I have to understand, what are those moments that I get triggered? Like, what's causing me to feel that? I have over 50 shame triggers that I'm aware of and over 60 anger triggers that I'm aware of. Why is that important? Because until I can understand how to get in my body and to understand externally what's prompting and triggering it, I can't really start to do anything about it, right? So I've got 2 special needs kids. My wife also loves Chihuahuas, and they yip like crazy. So when our doorbell goes off and they start going nutso and my sensory overload goes up to here, I better be able to understand that that's one of my triggers, because if one of my kids jumps in my lap right after that and I haven't effectively moved through it, what energy are they going to get?
Yeah.
Angry, on edge, tense dad. And that's what they absorb in the moment. Whether they associate it or not isn't the point. That's the whole point, is that this is all so subtle that we absorb this our entire lives and don't realize the patterns that created it. So why is moving in the moment so important? Because it's what allows us to flip our lid. So if my wife, for example, says something to me today that I feel triggered, I can literally step into awareness real time. I can own my current state and reality. I've done the work to unpack. So in that moment, I can flip my lid and effectively move through it by telling her, hey, babe, I don't know why, but whatever you just said triggered me, which means I don't think I heard you correctly. Could you please pause and restate it? And I'll try to hear it through a more neutral lens. And if for whatever reason I'm not able to do that, maybe can we pause this conversation and revisit it later? I'm taking ownership real time. And because we've opened up the lines of communication, what has that done? I've not created any damage, right? It's actually communicating my truth. Shit, my son just last night did something. He was a total jerk in our house to my daughter, right? And he's been having trouble stepping into ownership. And then finally last night, it was like something clicked and he goes, I'm really sorry. My brain told me to do something and I couldn't get control of it. And so I know that as a result of it, it impacted you. And that was not what I meant to do.
Wow. That is self-awareness, isn't it? Like, and this is it, you know, all part of connecting to ourselves is self-awareness. And again, being aware of all that's happening in this meat suit. Oh, Brian, now look, if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about the 5 pillars and actually change their whole goddamn life, where can they go?
Yeah, if you're a social media person, you can find me at Bogert Brian on any of the channels. Our website's brianbogert.com, but honestly, it's just a freaking corporate style website that's going to give you education. If you really want to go deeper, I would love to give you and your audience a gift, because you can come into my world for free for 3 days. We run 3-day virtual events. And in that course, we talk a lot about digital marketing and foundation, but we go deep into the pillars and how do we apply them in both our life and business to connect and convert and scale by understanding who we're serving and the niches and the ways that we go about it, because it matters, right? So the 3-day virtual event, if you go to go.brianbogert.com/amplify and you use the VIP code VIP100, you will get access to that event for free. But here's what I'm going to ask of you. Show up and invest the time. Me giving it to you for free is not in any way suggesting the value. In fact, I believe in serving before selling so much that I add so much value, and I'm going to give you 18 hours of coaching. And I want to be clear, and this isn't said to impress. There are people who pay me $15,000 to fly in for a 1-day intensive.
And I can see why after spending this time with you.
18 hours of my time are going to be invested to teach all of what I've learned as an entrepreneur in the last 20, 25 years to help service-based entrepreneurs or anybody looking to go deeper in their life in business to be able to do so. And so, again, that's a gift to you and your audience. I love the questions you ask. I love the space you're creating. I love the energy, the tone, and the permission you're giving on so many levels. By doing that so actively, you're alleviating so much suffering just by the way you exist, my friend. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, last big question for you, and I can't wait for this answer. Brian, what's the change you'd like to see in the world and how can we bring it to life?
I think what we all desire is freedom. And freedom means different things, and it hits on so many different categories. But I find that most people believe that freedom is the scariest place to be. Right? And if we look at this through the lens of an airplane, do you know what happens in an airplane when they fly in parabolic flight?
What's that?
Weightlessness. When they train people to understand weightlessness outside of the buoyancy underneath the pool, they do it in a plane that literally flies like this up and down. Now, what's interesting is the weightlessness doesn't happen in the curves. It happens in the middle, right? I believe that so much of our world right now is fighting, and they're fighting for what they believe is freedom based on a set of beliefs that's been conditioned, tied to a lot of this trash that their lives have only further validated. So they're hiding even more behind the armor, right? And we view different as scary, as fearful today. Therefore, the reason so many people are intentional to be divisive because they actually believe like that they're in threat from other people that are in the same fucking meat suits you and I are, right? And so if we understand this, it's because here's the problem. Most people are anchoring to something outside of themselves. They're deciding that their value, their worth, their safety, their protection, their connection is coming through some outside means. And therefore, I'm protecting against the other parts I don't want to absorb because I can't stand in my own clearly, right? Freedom is the hardest place to be because most people don't know how to anchor in them, anchor in themselves. And I believe if we can give a ripple effect where we can stop divisiveness, we can limit and reduce the amount of damage that's being created intentionally or unintentionally, and give people a space and permission to stand on their own 2 feet, confident and convicted in who they are, knowing that the world's not going to rattle that. Could you imagine the freedom of expression, the creativity, the solutions, the connection, the love that could all exist? So why am I in this role? We're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible. I think I said that earlier, but what does that mean? We want to reduce this level of suffering that exists on this planet, largely of which is internal, and most of it comes from this level of disconnection that we've only been further separated by. So the change in the world is, I want people to understand how to connect with themselves and how to connect with each other so that we can recognize that genuinely we are the same set of meat suit. I say it a different way, but I love your language, so I'm using it on your show, okay? But here's the truth. We are the same. And how do I know that? Because I am privileged to have worked and been in almost every capacity of life at all different levels, in many, many dark places. I'm a practitioner of pain and have dealt with it. I've suffered. I also know what it looks like to have joy, freedom, and fulfillment on the other side. But I've also put myself into a position to have people that are worth $250,000 or more fly to my home, in my home studio to record on my podcast and sit down. And when we unpack and flip the lid into their stories, there's individuals who realize that someday they woke up and they're as empty as their 15,000 square foot house, even though they're worth $250,000. Right? Like, it's not about the money. Money's energy, just like everything else. Love is energy. I think love is the greatest currency we can give because it garners attention, it garners a connection, it garners everything that we want. So I just want people to have permission to finally be who they are and live within their own power and potential.
Absolutely, could not agree more. Brian, I could just talk to you all day because, like, we have so much in common, it's not funny. And we are so much on the same page. And, you know, I have picked up your energy today. I have felt it right in the heart. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for being a part of the change and being part of the ethical evolution.
Well, I got to say that not only do we probably share a whole lot in common, but I think we both have a pretty damn good style for glasses, and our hairstyles are
we do
similar.
And cool tats
too. I'm just
too.
saying, like, I love the look, I love the vibe, and the tattoos, the ink, the love. It's all good. So truly, I'm grateful for the opportunity, and thank you for creating a platform for me to be able to pour some good into the world.
What's good, everybody? It's your boy, Paper Route Slay here, coming live to you from the Oddless app, letting you know that you should tap in right now to Streets 100, the only station for uncensored hip-hop, trap, and drill music. Stop listening to the regular stations that got all the skips, edits, and silent treatment. Come listen to the only station that doesn't suck, your only station for uncensored hip-hop music. Streets 100, over and out.
Streets 100 is the real voice of the streets. Yup, and always serving that loud pack for your speakers.
All right. Welcome. Hosted by yours truly, Rich LaMonica. We invite experts from many fields, from authors to entrepreneurs, to share their journeys with the Misfit Nation, and a space for fellow veterans to share their stories through our Warrior Wednesday initiative. The show was born from veterans, but has evolved into a living, breathing place to showcase leadership, mindset, motivation, loyalty, and above all, family. Join us to enjoy great chats and possibly become a guest.
Electricast.
Misfit Nation.
Electricast.